Caleb from Brownells here, and in today's video we're going to be going over how to get the dope for your rifle, or data on previous engagement. So dope is just an acronym, and it's just an acronym. It's a fancy way of saying how to find out, or how to get your rifle to shoot where you're aiming at various distances. So we're going to need to know some information in order to make that happen. So the tools we're going to need we're going to need some secondary tools, I should say. But the number one thing, the most important thing you're going to need to make sure is that you have a good zero with your rifle. And I say good zero because, I mean, like, we're not talking about, like, approximately 100 yards. Maybe it's zeroed at, like, 125, 50 yards, something like that. You need to know exactly how far your rifle's zeroed. So, me, for example, I'm going to be walking you through how I do all this, my process for getting this for a rifle. So, my rifles, especially my longer range rifles, they're all zeroed at 100 meters. So I typically use meters, so I'll be saying meters quite a bit throughout this video. If you prefer to use yards, that's perfectly fine. The only thing that matters versus meter and yards is that you stay consistent with what you're doing, right? So if you're ranging stuff at 100 meters, you don't want to be putting 100 yards into your ballistic calculator. So as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter. You can use centimeters if you want, but it doesn't work that way. You get what I'm saying. All right. Now, going back to the tools, once we're sure our rifle is zeroed correctly, right, tools we're going to need. You're going to need some sort of ballistic calculator. There's a bunch of different apps out there for free on your cell phone. You can get a bunch of different companies make them. Whichever one you prefer, that's great. I personally prefer Applied Ballistics, and I actually mostly do everything in my Kestrel. So this Kestrel has all that in there already, and I typically just use that. Also, I have the Garmin Tactics smartwatch, and it also has, let me get to it here, Applied Ballistics in it as well. So it gives me my rifle dope right here on my watch. Okay, now that you have some sort of app, like I said, if you don't know anything about it, I'd recommend just jumping over, go to the app store, Samsung, Apple, whatever, type in Applied Ballistics, download it, and it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to tell you the information you need to put into it, and the rest of it you don't really have to worry about for now anyway. So, alright, now we have some sort of ballistic app. We got a good zero on our rifle. We're going to need some sort of rangefinder. So we need to know exactly how far our targets are in order to calculate, what our bullet needs to do in order to get there in correlation with where we're aiming. So there's a bunch of different laser rangefinders out there. Just pick one. Again, I've used the Vortex ones, Leupold, Burris. They all work great. If you have a laser rangefinder that mounts on your rifle itself, that's great too. You just need something. And then from there, I would also highly recommend a chronograph. You can get away without using one, and I'll kind of tell you how to later on. But if you have a chronograph, that'll save you a lot of ammo and a lot of trial and error. Chronographs I recommend, the Garmin. The one I use the most is the Garmin C1 and C2. I use the C2 the most now that one's out because that's a great product. But it's nice and compact. You just set it next to your rifle while you're shooting, and it will give you your muzzle velocity. So muzzle velocity is a really important piece of information for calculating your ballistics. And usually when I sit down to zero my rifle, I'll just set my chronograph down next to it and shoot. And then by the time I'm done zeroing, I've got a chronograph full of data. And the Garmin chronograph also, let me get to it here, that also syncs to my Garmin watch. So as I'm shooting, my muzzle velocities show up right here on my wrist. So there's a theme here. As you can tell, I really like Garmin products, and they work great for this stuff. Now, with all that, you have all those tools. I'd recommend having something to write on. You can also use, you can take notes in your phone, whatever, just somewhere to take notes. So once you have all the tools, then you can begin the process of actually developing that dope card and jump right into it. So assuming we already have the rifle zeroed, not going to go through that because if you're just jump on our channel, you can look up, how to zero a rifle. We go through that in detail. And like I said, make sure you have a good zero. If you have a target that you've never ranged before, and it's supposed to be like 100 yards, let's say, and you zero your rifle to that target, then you hit it with your laser rangefinder. Turns out it's 110 or 115 yards. Maybe it's less, maybe it's 90 yards. Whenever it comes time to put your zero distance into your ballistic calculator, put the one you hit with the rangefinder, all right? Don't put that guesstimate in there. Because here's the deal. With your ballistic app, whatever you're putting that data into, if you give it guesses and estimations, it's going to give you back the same thing, guesses and estimations. So the better the data you put into it, the better the data you get out of it. And that's as simple as it is, all right? So, a rifle zeroed. Now, I have a muzzle velocity. I know what ammo I'm using. And we can kind of build from there. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use this rifle as an example. So in this rifle, I have it zeroed with Hornady Frontier 75 grain boat tail hollow point bullets. Okay, that's the ammunition I'm using in this gun. So you need to know what ammunition you're using, of course. And when you fire up your ballistic app, I'm going to be using my Kestrel here. Whenever you put in the information for your gun in whatever app you're using, again, I'm going through my Kestrel, but this information applies to all your ballistic apps. All right, so I have this gun set up in here. The first thing it's asking me for is my muzzle velocity. So that chronograph I shot, I'm going to put in that muzzle velocity. It's going to tell me an average. I'm going to put in that average right here into my Kestrel, right there, muzzle velocity. So my average was 2860 here, okay? And then we're going to go to the that ballistic coefficient scale. It's wrong right now, but we'll get to it in just a second. So I put in my muzzle velocity. Now, if you don't have a chronograph and you still want to go through with this process, the box of ammunition you have will tell you a muzzle velocity. That's a really rough estimate. It's almost always wrong. Because that only applies to whatever they tested it in at the factory, okay? But it's a good starting point, so you can go ahead and put that number in. I'll tell you how to true it up later. All right, so now we have our drag model, and that's gonna correlate to our ballistic coefficient. All right, so it says my ballistic coefficient, so my drag model is G1, and my ballistic coefficient is 0.355. Now, G1 is great for flat-based bullets, or flat-based projectiles, right? But if I'm shooting modern boat tail bullets, G7 is actually a better profile, a more accurate profile for that drag model. So, for example, let me show you here. Let me go back. At 500 yards, I need to hold 2.91 mil radians, right? And if I go back in to my gun, change that to G7, now it's 2.88 mil radians. So it does make a pretty big difference. Definitely the difference between a hit or a miss on which one you use. Now, we'll get to the rest of that stuff later if I'm speaking a foreign language to you, but let me get back to it here. All right, so make sure you use the correct drag model for the type of projectile you're shooting. So just, again, reiterate, general rule of thumb, modern boat tail, long-range projectiles, use G7. Older stuff, like even I have guns that are zeroed, like my BRN4, for example. That gun, I did a dope card for that, and that gun is just shooting standard 55 grain, like M193. That's what I shoot most commonly through that. So I have that one set to a G1 because that's that flat base older style projectile. Okay, so now that you know which drag model to use, now you need to know what actual ballistic coefficient number to use. And you find that out by just going to the manufacturer of your projectile. And for example here, if I jump over to Hornady's website, they will tell me everything I need to know about the bullet or the cartridge I'm shooting. So just Google it. Just punch it into Google. Typically the manufacturer's website will come up. That's the most reliable place to get information from. And put that in. So like I said, make sure you're putting in the ballistic coefficient number for either G1 or G7. They'll tell you on the website which one. So put that in. And then now we need to know something very important, and that is bullet weight. So bullet weight here, let me go back here because it's listed a little higher. Whenever I was messing around with the settings earlier, I messed this stuff all up, so I got to go and redo it. But bullet weight, like I said, I shoot 75 grain, so set it to 75 grain. And your bullet weight in pretty much every case will be listed on the box of your ammo. So like 6.5 Creedmoor, maybe you're shooting like, I don't know, 140s or something like that. 140 ELD matches, just put in 140. So you need to know your bullet weight. And then you'll need to know your bullet diameter. So for a 5.56 or 2.23, it's not 2.23, it's 2.24 is the actual bullet diameter. So 0.224, put in there. Again, I'm doing this in the Kestrel, but your Ballistic app, you'll just be able to scroll, punch it in, whatever. And then your zero distance. So very important number right here. I put in 100 meters because I measured exactly 100 meters zero distance. Like I said, if you hit it with your laser rangefinder, turns out you were actually zeroed at 110, put 110, okay? Put that number in here. And then, so height over bore. So this is the distance. You'll need a pretty decent measurement on this here. Actually, I typically just use a tape measure for this because it doesn't have to be down to the thousandth of an inch or anything like that. So what I do, I will measure from the center line of your optic here, your actual tube, to the center line of your rifle's bore, okay? So I see a lot of people mess this up. They'll measure like the center line of the scope to the top of the rail. That ain't it. It's the actual center of the bore to the center of your optic. And I usually measure more detailed than this, but I'll just give you a rough idea of how to do it. So center line of my bore, center line of my optic here, that is 2 3/4 inches, which I already have in here, 2.75. That's already ready, set up, and good to go. So just take that measurement, put it into your ballistic calculator, because again, that does make a big difference. And then you may have some other numbers in there, like 0 height or 0 offset. So I actually do. So mine is at, my 0 height is -0.2. And the reason for that is when I shot my 0, my elevation was off slightly. So slightly that if I were to adjust it in my turret, it would offset it in the other direction. So it's within like the noise of the turret's adjustment. So you can set that number in here and just leave it and just put your turret as close as you can. So I set my turret, then I set that at 0.2 inches. And now I don't have to worry about that because the ballistic calculator will calculate that small change in my 0 out at range, if that makes sense. So you may not even have to ever put this in for your particular situation. I did for mine, and that's how you do it. Then 0 offset, that's windage left or right. My windage is fine, so I didn't mess with that. All right, so another important thing here, rifle twist. And I know this rifle here is a 1 in 7 twist, and typically they're mostly going to be right hand, so I have that in there. So 1 in 7, and units of measurement. So I have my units of measurement in mil-radian because that's what my scope measurements are in. I prefer mil-radian for pretty much everything. Some people like to shoot the MOA. MOA is a different type of measurement, okay? So the important thing to remember here is if you have a scope that's measured in MOA adjustments or MOA reticle, it'll be both of those if you have one. You're not going to have a reticle that's in mil and an adjustment that's in MOA. That'll all be the same. But the fact of the matter here is if you have MRAD, MRAD is what you set your ballistic calculator to, and the same thing for MOA. If you have MOA scope, you're going to be working in MOA in your calculator. Okay, and then from there, we are ready to start messing with some targets here. So that's all the data you need for the ballistic calculator to spit out some numbers for your gun. Okay, so now what you need to do, and what I can actually do in here, and what you probably have in your ballistic app, is some sort of range card. All right, so I click range card, and then it'll give me a table here measured in meters because that's what I'm set to. Again, yours will be yards if you're using yards. But range 100 meters, that should be 0, but because I have a 0 offset, it's actually 0.01, which isn't at all a big deal. And those units are measured in mil-radians, so the same thing my reticle is. And then that goes out pretty dang far. I'm at 450 meters right now, and it's just telling me my holds or what I can dial to on my actual turret. So that's great. Now we can just write those numbers down on a card to make what would essentially be a dope card. So if, like for example, at our range on our 500 yard bay, we have targets at every 100 yard increment. Okay, so in this ballistic calculator, I have 5 targets listed. Let me go back here. So I have 100 yard target, a 200 yard target, all the way out to 500 yards. And of course you can go further than that if you want. And it tells me my drop for that. And it also gives me a wind reading as well, so I know what to hold for wind. But that's assuming I know what the wind is actually doing. So with that, we'll probably talk about reading wind in another video. We're just setting up a card for mainly for elevation purposes here. But it does give you a wind reading, so I'll just really briefly touch on that. So the wind itself, and let me get that pulled up. So if you look at this Kestrel, for example, it gives me 2 wind readings. So one is to hold 0.71, the other is to hold 1.45. So the first reading is if the wind is blowing at 5 miles an hour. The second one is if it's blowing at 10 miles an hour. So if I know I have a 10 mile an hour crosswind, then I should hold that, right? But it's really hard to kind of know what the wind's doing 500 yards away, especially here in Iowa where the wind does all kind of crazy stuff. But it gives you that information, and that's also good information to put on your dope card. So if you have a pretty good idea of what the wind's doing, then you can hold that. But with that, now you have all your data, and you can actually start. If I were to take this gun right here and using that 500 yard info, so that 2.92 mil, if I were to dial this, and I'm going to round, of course, so 2.9 was already set there because I was shooting the other day. But if I take this and I put it on my target, on our 500 yard bay, like the big IPSC larger steel target, I guarantee you if I'm aiming center mass, I'm going to hit it every single time. It's easy. Now, whenever I want to hit maybe the head of that target or a 6-inch plate at 500, now I need to make sure this data is true. So how do I true up all this data I just collected to make sure it all is actually working? And this is also where you would true up your muzzle velocity if you didn't have a chronograph. So now we're on to that part. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I would take my rifle and start walking it out. So I would start at 100, dial to 0, and then I would fire one shot. Boom. Okay, hit. Great. I would go to 200. That's 0.37. Great. So I would dial, this doesn't go I can't dial 0.37 tenths in my optic, so I would dial 0.4 because I would just round up to the nearest tenth. So I would dial 4 tenths, and then I would fire the shot. Boom, hit. Okay, great. And repeat that. So now I'm at 1 full mil. Bam, fire that shot all the way out to 500. Now let's say I get to the 500. I take a shot at the 6-inch plate. I'm dialed exactly where I need to be. I'm at 2.9 mils. I fire the shot, and it goes under the target. Just under it. I just missed it. Like I was maybe 2 tenths low. So maybe I should be at 3.1. Do I adjust this to 3.1 without truing up that data? No, I don't. I'm going to fire another shot. And if it goes to the same place, I know that something's a little off with the data, so it's not trued up. So now is my opportunity to true up that data. So there's 2 ways to do it. We're going to talk about muzzle velocity first, because this is where you would true up that muzzle velocity if you didn't have a chronograph. So I know, based on what my misses were, I should have been at, what did I say earlier, 3.1 mils? So 3.1, let's say I dial to 3.1, I fire the shot and it hits. Okay, so it's 3.1. Well, why is my ballistic calculator telling me 2.9? Like that's messed up. Okay, so now we're going to true up that data. Now, the way to do that, one way to do that is with muzzle velocity. So I'm going to go back to my gun settings, and I'm going to take my muzzle velocity, and I'm just going to drop it down until it says something close to 3.1. So it's at 2860 feet per second right now. Let's see what happens if I drop it down to 2810. 3.06, so we're getting closer. Let's drop it down to 2800 feet per second. 3.09, okay? That's pretty dang good. So now, I adjusted my muzzle velocity to match with what my bullet's doing downrange. Now that data's trued up. So I can just basically walk this gun back out again, and it would hit all those targets, except this time, I would hit that 500-yard target as well. And if you didn't have a good muzzle velocity before, now you do. So that's how you kind of walk in your muzzle velocity if you don't have a chronograph as well. Now the other way to do it is to adjust your ballistic coefficient. So let me get back to 2860, which is where it was. All right, so now I'm back at 2860, 2.9, that's right where I need to be. Okay, now, the other way to do it versus adjusting your muzzle velocity is going to be to adjust your ballistic coefficient number. So I'm going to go back into my gun. I'm going to take my ballistic coefficient, and I'm going to drop that number down. So right now it's on a G7.182. I'm going to drop it to a 0.175. So that got me to 0.298. All right, 6.5 got me a little bit closer. Okay, perfect. So I adjusted my ballistic coefficient down into 0.163, and now it's showing 3.1 again. So I trued up that data using the ballistic coefficient this time instead of the muzzle velocity. So that's 2 ways to do it there. Both of them work. Again, if you didn't have a good muzzle velocity before, like if you weren't using a chronograph, use the muzzle velocity to true it up, because that's going to be better than messing with the ballistic coefficient, because you never had a good muzzle velocity number to begin with. But if you have a good muzzle velocity number, you can definitely don't be scared to mess with that ballistic coefficient a little bit. Again, you should be close, right? Like you should be really close to hitting the target, or that data should be really close to true. This is just to fine tune it. If you're way off, you messed up something way earlier in the process, go back and do the process again. But if you're pretty dang close, like the example given here, then it's perfectly okay to mess with these numbers. Now I need to remember what my my ballistic coefficient was here before I started messing with this for the video. Give me just a second. All right, yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, 180.180. All right, now that is pretty much all there is to it. Now, also, one thing I want to touch on that I kind of grazed over earlier is targets. So when you're setting up your targets in your, like if you're using a Kestrel, for example, there's 3 things you need to know for your target. You need to know the distance, obviously. You need to know the angle. So if you're shooting uphill or downhill, that's very important, because shooting uphill and downhill will greatly change your point of impact. And then you also need to know direction. Direction, you don't really need to know. It's not that important until you start shooting really far. But the Earth is round and it is spinning, so it's important to know the direction as well. But the 2 biggest things are going to be, for most of us, are going to be distance and the actual like degree of elevation, right? So, like for example, when I was at Hat Creek, we were shooting at some pretty crazy angles, and if you didn't put that in there, you were going to miss the target every single time. We were literally shooting down mountains and up mountains, and it's extremely important information. Okay, now you know how to set up the dope for your rifle. You know how to record all that information. You know how to fine-tune that information. So you're pretty much ready to start shooting some longer range targets. Now, of course, the gun can only do so much. The rest is up to you. So you make sure you get out there, you practice, and you actually put some rounds down range. And this was a pretty rudimentary class, if you will. So I know there are some stuff I kind of glanced over, and there's more detailed versions of everything I said here. There's also some really good channels out there that give you a lot of that information. My favorite example here is going to be X-Ring. So X-Ring does some really great long-range shooting stuff. He has some really good information on YouTube. If I remember, I'll try to link his channel down below. So with that, also another really good channel, 9-Hole Reviews. They do some awesome, really cool long-range stuff with a bunch of different firearms. But like I said, whenever it comes to long-range shooting, I'm definitely still learning. I'm more of a novice in that world. But I feel comfortable enough to pass along this kind of basic information. So here it is. And if you have anything you'd like to add to this, feel free to post it in the comment section down below. And if you need help with anything for any reason ever, feel free to give us a call on the tech line. We'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.